It begins in a humble little village. We cook fish, help retrieve some flowers. People chatter and walk about, eagerly preparing for the upcoming peach harvest festival. The local shaman lectures a group of curious children, outlining the story of how the merciful souls bestowed their wisdom to the village ancestors, selecting only the most pious to live the rest of their lives among the divine. You can practically see the shoe waiting to drop. It doesn't wait very long. That evening, at the altar to the souls, an opaque film enshrouds the village's chosen one by one, twisting the head off in a fountain of blood, their lifeless bodies tossed to the floor and lowered underground. Each decapitation ends with a burst of blossom petals as the film lifts, the flimsiest of facades, signifying the chosen's supposed ascendance into paradise. The inside of the underground facility is likewise grotesque, conveyors of bodies being processed part by part, collated into an amorphous fluid for further processing. The characters never mention or speak about what's happening in the background, as if it doesn't really exist at all. It's a striking opening sequence, and one that speaks to the nature and strength of a game like Nine Souls. Questions will be given and raised, but rarely is there an immediate answer. Rather, Nine Souls slowly builds a mosaic out of New Kunlun, revealing to you the specific details of any one element of the world only when you have the proper understanding to place that element in a broader context. It is in this way that Nine Souls is best able to construct its identity. In my Ori video, I talked about how one of the characteristic features of Metroidvanias is the early game fugue, consisting typically of a confusing labyrinth expedition across hostile territories. In contrast, Nine Souls is quite linear, with few branching paths or choices that don't immediately lead to dead ends. Instead, the game instills confusion in the manner I've just described, by obscuring the fundamentals of the setting at the outset, and leaving most of the world building to intuition and scarce context clues. Characters in informational logs throw terms out like Fusang, Turbulent Era, Vital Sanctums, Fang Shi, Tian Dao, Tian Wo, but never reveal their significance to the story at hand. Even the name of the world we're exploring, New Kunlun, requires some digging to reveal, lest it be confused with other peculiar sounding locations like Penglai. To the characters within this story, these terms are given constants, obvious facts of the matter for which there is little need or reason to explain. It is with a deft hand that Nine Souls is able to slowly but surely bridge the gap between the player's understanding and that of the characters. What's important to understand about Nine Souls is that, despite the often confusing nature of the world, its storytelling is far more direct than other games of the genre. Unlike its contemporaries, Nine Souls is quite happy to sit you down for several minutes of dialogue at a time, and the intricacies of the setting do have concrete explanations to them, with little to no theorizing required, even if it takes some time to reach them. Nine Souls is simply a game that wants you to dwell on what it's offering before it gives you all the answers. It's without a doubt the most narratively driven game of this type I've played, and though this will certainly have implications for its longevity in the overall discussion space, the risk here more than pays off. While the combat is deservedly lauded, I'd argue Nine Souls leaves its most distinctive mark in its narrative. And that's because what the game is sitting you down for is worth reading in its entirety, and then some. Quite bluntly, the reason Nine Souls' story works so fantastically is because Yi, the protagonist, is all around excellent. Rather than a bland cipher or obvious mouthpiece, Yi is a multifaceted character with a rich perspective. Rich because his philosophy on life consistently manifests across his behavior in a coherent way. The conflict facing Yi is at once straightforward yet infinitely insurmountable. Yi views the world with logic and rationality as his guiding light. He talks at length about avoiding superstition, which he defines as blindly believing in something without any basis or proof, clarifying that if you're promised something good, but in exchange you must loyally follow orders and not doubt anything, chances are that's a superstition. Amongst the most heinous of superstitions to Yi is Taoism, the dominant spiritual school of thought in his home planet of Penglai. Yi makes it quite clear that Taoist thought is a practice for the cowards and ignoramus of the world. Periodically throughout the game, Yi is sent mysterious transmissions from his late sister Heng, causing him to reminisce about their relationship throughout his life. A collection of the most powerful scenes in the game, these moments depict this difference in philosophy acutely. A younger Yi frequently criticizes his sister's naivety and curiosity about their planet as nonsense. On a hike, the two siblings take a transport across a series of ancient structures. While Heng sees pretty towers to play on, Yi can see them as nothing but vessels for storing rhizomatic energy. When Heng claims to hear the primordial roots speak, Yi is quick to dismiss her, explaining the phenomenon as merely the random static generated by its energy. Yi grows to resent his parents, who discourage his interest in research with paranoia-laden ramblings about how science makes people violent, a phrase Heng repeats to him uncritically. When building his Azure Flyer, Yi initially rebuffs Heng's attempts to give it a distinctive aesthetic style. Much like his thoughts about his precious rhizomatic vessels, Yi argues, it's the function that matters, not the form, right? It's only fitting that Heng should wish to rename Yi's flyer the Mystic Nymph. Time only widens the ideological divide. Yi quickly becomes head of one of the most technologically ambitious projects in the history of his people. When a virus named Tianwo begins to spread across Penglai, Yi suggests a radical plan to the council he now finds himself a part of. He suggests placing all Solarians within the raised continent of New Kunlun, inside a conscious cryosleep, to slow the spread of the virus and extend the time to find a cure and a new home planet for his people. He dubs this the Eternal Cauldron Project. Far from an Azure Flyer, the weight of an entire species now rests on Yi's extended science fair assignment. The new faster-than-light capable continent, alongside Yi's Eternal Cauldron Project, transforms the land to embody the philosophy of its architects. In New Kunlun, vistas of nature are often nothing more than holographic technology meant to simulate a realistic environment. Dreamlike planes are advanced stasis simulations called soulscapes, to experience the joys of life while under indefinite rest. The soul, once named after a great spiritual figure and worshipped as such, is rebranded as the governmental agency under Yi's grand project. Bureaucrats meant to facilitate and enact the Solarians' greatest scientific achievement. Over the course of our adventure, major swaths of geography are utilized as processing facilities, power grids, genetically modified gardens, warehouses, and factories, extensions of the Solarians' technological prowess. Meanwhile, the Solarian spirituality is left to crumble in buried catacombs and deserted temples. It's clear what the souls value above all else. Nine Souls has a particular distrust in immortality. Lear, both the leading figure in Penglai's scientific community and in Taoist thought, lays out what he believes the quest is really about. Amidst this pitch-black sky, we seek a sun that can illuminate the entire universe. But at what cost? What have we become? The Solarians have made great technological progress, but has that made them a wiser people, Lear wonders? It's a question that motivates the entirety of Nine Souls, when the souls set out to live up to their self-anointed namesake, and illuminate the secrets of the entire universe for themselves. Consistent with Lear's concern, the game repeatedly shows this ambition as folly. Lady Ethereal develops the Soulscape system, which allows people to be in a constant dream while in cryostasis. Though her tests prove problematic, driving the subjects mad after a 30-day trial, pressure from Council Leader Yagong ensured the system would go live before it was ready. The catch, though, is that the Soulscape system could never truly be ready. Its flaw, Nine Souls would argue, is in concept, not execution. The Soulscape promises spiritual immortality, as Yi suggests, a forever paradise within the dream. And when those subjects are woken up from that eternal paradise, it should be no surprise they go mad. How else is one supposed to react when being ripped away from perfection? Meanwhile, Yen Lao keeps track of a giant collection of artifacts in the very unambiguously titled Boundless Repository, pieces of art and treasure which ostensibly represent Penglai's culture. Yen Lao believes that if this collection is maintained, so too can the significance of Penglai's history. Once again, Nine Souls finds conceptual issues with Yen Lao's idea. In an excellent speech, Ji ponders just how much value these artifacts really carry. He argues that an antique only carries its full essence for a brief moment of time, in which the context of that antique is fully experienced. A piece of art meant to comment on some political matter, G says, loses meaning after the political climate which animated that art disappears, because the emotions which the piece was meant to evoke no longer exist. It transforms the experience from something embodied to something impersonal. The difference between "that was what I felt" to "that must have been what they felt at the time." Ji suggests Yen Lao's Boundless Repository is not a recreation of Penglai's history, but a blurry photocopy. Ji himself is immortal, an ironic existence for the living character in the game who believes in the great Tao the most. Ji explicitly refers to his condition as a curse. He patiently waits for his death, and is unwilling to bring it upon himself because he figures he would not have been granted so much life were he not meant to live. So he carries on, seeing the rise and fall of countless empires and ambitions, scrawling his favorite moments of history on a near endless display of stone tablets. All of which, of course, would be laughable imitations by his own logic. It's easy to imagine how ecstatic he must have felt when his hexagrams finally foretold his death by Yi's hands, an opportunity to witness in motion the last great figure of Solarian history. Of course, Igong represents Nine Soul's anxiety over immortality most clearly. It is revealed that the Tianhuo virus, which initiated the events of the game, originated from her lab, the result of a failed genetic experiment that was explicitly meant to make the Solarians immortal. Igong convinces the Council of Souls to suppress the incident so that she may continue her research. She deliberately excludes Yi from this decision, knowing that he would reject deceiving his own people. Gumaong, who claims that such lies are imperative in maintaining the fabric of society, goes so far as to call Yi ideologically bankrupt for protesting Igong's plan. These blatant tactics, combined with the specifics of the soul's individual tasks, reveals the entirety of New Kunlun for what it really is, more than a vessel to find a new home, or an elaborate assemblage of factories and warehouses. It is an experiment predicated on the idea that our history, our homes, our very bodies can be everlasting. The stakes of such an enormous task begins to change the character of Yi and Heng's conversations. While the two's debates about science and Taoist thought were more abstract in their younger years, the adult siblings now speak about the issue more concretely and much more candidly. When Heng tries to make the case for Taoist thought, Yi decries those believers as deluded fanatics, historical revisionists who misinterpret the very principles their dear leader believed in before he adopted that superstitious Taoist drivel. Though his rhetoric has become more hostile and unsympathetic, his perspective has ultimately changed very little. For Yi, the world should not be understood by embracing its beauty, its ebbs and flows. Instead, to understand something, we must first ascertain the cause and effect which allowed it to form, shaped from the very causalities of nature the scientific method pursues. Yi eventually learns about the virus cover-up from the rest of the souls. Unsurprisingly, he becomes outraged, so much so he decides that he will hold his colleagues to account for their duplicity, alongside himself for his own complicity. It's all perfectly logical, isn't it? In Yi's world of cause and effect, there must have been a reason, some causal explanation which precipitated the initial outbreak of Tianhuo. So when it becomes clear what Igong did, and what the souls did, the causal chain finally locks together. They caused the virus. We destroyed our home for this ludicrous project. We killed our own people and said nothing. We are all to blame. But over the course of 9 Souls, he finds this causal explanation brings him no relief. As Yi inadvertently points out to Shannon during a drunken tirade, his desire to see beyond the Peach Blossom Village and away from the shaman's superstitions is simply substituting a smaller cage for a bigger one. 9 Souls wants to argue Yi feels much the same way about his Eternal Cauldron project. It is clear that 9 Souls finds Yi's perspective concerning. However, Yi is not incorrect simply because he doesn't wholeheartedly accept the teachings of Taoism and all that entails. There's the sense the game finds Yi's parents, devout Taoist believers, just as troublesome in their repudiation of science as some kind of dangerous, corrupting text. One could easily imagine Yi's parents advocating for the complete banning of such material. No, I think it's far more likely the game thinks Yi is incorrect because he's unwilling to see any merit within the Taoist perspective whatsoever, and why such beliefs may be worthy of existing. This is the difference between him and his sister. When Yi talks about building a new paradise for his people, Heng does not tell him he is wrong to think this way. She instead gives him words of encouragement. Of course, I've always believed in you, Yi. In their heartbreaking final encounter, Heng decides that she wants to die under the Great Tao in Penglai, refusing to go aboard New Kunlun towards a new home. Heng does not tell Yi that he is making a mistake, or that he is wrong to pursue the course of action he believes is right. She simply states that Yi and her just made different choices. Heng comments this with sincerity. Though it is not the path she personally wants to travel down, she respects her brother's decision to make it. But Yi cannot give his sister the same courtesy. In his mind, Hang's decision is self-abasement, an admission of guilt. When Hang speaks of the great Tao, she puts herself in league with fanatics and cowards and prejudiced bumpkins. When Hang stays behind on Penglai, it is not a personal choice, but a personal insult. He has worked endlessly to help preserve the future of the Solarians, only to come home for his sister to spit on his grand gesture. His work all in vain, because the person he wants to save most doesn't want to be saved at all, entirely for the sake of inane beliefs none but the most dim-witted would ever entertain. How could he have been so easily duped? How could this charlatan be the person he loved and respected for so long? Periodically in Nine Souls, you'll collect items, be it jinn, accessories, or poisonous objects, that necessitate warping back to the main hub of the game for a dialogue interlude. Don't be fooled, this is no break in the action. The Four Seasons Pavilion is in many ways the heart and soul of Nine Souls. It is where a majority of Yi's ideological transformation occurs, and where the main cast is allowed to interact and continue their respective sub-stories. And the major side players in Yi's story are wonderful little additions that breathe life both unto Yi and themselves. Some of the characters directly challenge Yi's prejudices. The pavilion eventually becomes the home of two ape men, who are all too eager to poke into Yi's personal business. It's more than a little awkward. As the founder of the Eternal Cauldron Project, Yi's the one who proposed and oversaw the harvesting of ape men brains to power the soulscapes. He claims to use Solarian brains, especially those suffering from Tianwo, would be unethical, in the game's most darkly ironic joke. Now Yi must contend with the cognitive dissonance of playing board games with his house guests, whilst using their neighbors outside as meat processors. Shannon is a rather irritable ape-man who tires of his fellow villagers and takes the first chance he gets to explore Greater New Kunlun once Yi destroys the altar to the ape-man facility. Yi eventually finds Shannon lying in a corridor, and the two quickly become drinking buddies. Their relationship is immediately endearing. When Shannon refuses to give Yi the recipes for his drinks, a drunken Yi responds in the most Yi way possible. This won't be hard to reproduce. It's just chemistry at the end of the day. Even copious amounts of alcohol can't shake the analytics out of him. He can't admit the drink tastes good and he wants it. He must performatively point out that it tasting good is the byproduct of a series of chemical reactions. As it turns out, Yi and Shannon share quite a bit in common. Shannon is frustrated by his fellow ape-men's lack of curiosity, indicating that their idol worship and superstition prevents him from living like a free man. He talks about his mentor teaching him to stay skeptical about everything, a no doubt Yi-approved message. But as the tipsy talks continue, their attitudes soften. Shannon admits to himself that sometimes ignorance is kind of bliss. When reflecting on his journey across New Kunlun, Yi becomes increasingly more sympathetic to the ape-men, at one point stating out loud that it's all my fault. He even pleads with Shannon to go back to the villagers, saying that once you miss that kind of chance, it doesn't come back, clearly referencing his own experiences with his sister. It's as if Yi is beginning to ask himself, what's even the point of all this? In parallel, Yi also develops a strong bond with Xuan, a boy who nursed him back to health at the beginning of the game. In the pavilion, Yi helps Xuan learn about painting, gives him tutorials on programming, pottery making, composing music, VR headsets, growing plants, amongst many other activities. At one point, Yi gives him one of his favorite strategy games, meant to simulate the order of the universe, which they play several times across Nine Souls. Yi clearly cares about cultivating the boy's talent, critiquing his skills and allowing him opportunities to practice and play with the tools available to him. Yi gives Xuan a talisman that's supposedly a good luck charm. While talking about the purpose of the ceremony in the village, Xuan offers his unique view on it. Without the ceremony, I wouldn't have been saved. I wouldn't have been able to live here with you, Yi. I guess something good did come out of it. Yi replies, another one of your silly fallacies. Extracting Xuan's brain was the point of the ceremony. The fact that it indirectly caused him to live in the Four Seasons Pavilion doesn't change the nature of it. There's no coherent causal chain here. That doesn't logically follow at all. The game repeatedly compares Xuan to Hang, and it's no surprise why. Xuan fully commits himself to embracing the beauty of the moment. The point of programming the weather inside the pavilion or watering an absurdly large tree isn't for the imperative value it provides to the group. It's because an absurdly large tree has a novelty that must be appreciated. Why care about function when we could instead spend so much more time caring about form? Perhaps the most intriguing character of the bunch may be Chiyu, a sentient living weapon who grows a strong distaste towards bloodshed. Though his insatiable appetite for art and stories keeps him occupied, his primary goal throughout the game is to commit one singular act of violence, to end his brother's life, Xingtian. Unlike Chiyu, Xingtian is a weapon with no sentience at all, led purely by the whims of his teleological code. Chiyu views this existence as horrifying, and lays out his opinion quite concretely when pressed by Yi. So you think only creatures with free will can be considered alive? Indeed, he who is unable to live for himself is just a dead man walking. Chiyu ends his speech with something quite revealing. The world is much too colorful to not listen to one's heart and waste time on tasks assigned by others. It would not be an exaggeration to say that Chiyu distills the perspective of Nine Souls into a single conversation. It is precisely this idea of living for oneself that informs Nine Souls' disdain for immortality. Immortality is a goal whose very nature is that it can never be achieved. It is not enough to live for even 1 billion years, because true immortality requires you to live 1 billion years in 1 day, and then 1 billion years in 2 days. Someone who seeks immortality can never live for today, because they must forever be concerned about tomorrow. It is a life devoid of meaning, where nothing new can be learned, because nothing new can ever be created to take its place. Immortality is a tautological, all-consuming task, where one only lives to have more life. Someone seeking immortality, Nine Souls suggests, cannot be living for oneself. This has everything to do with Yi. Though he does not personally seek immortality in the same way his mentor does, despite the primordial roots rather ironically granting him a kind of immortality, the game suggests he fails Chiyu's criteria for being alive. Nine Souls argues Yi operates with an improper view of science. The scientific method only provides us with the mechanisms underpinning the state of the world, but science itself cannot make any normative claims about those mechanisms. It cannot tell us how we should live. It cannot tell us why we should do things, nor whether those things are worth striving for in the first place. This is not a flaw of science, it is simply not what it was made for. So when Yi speaks of rhizomatic energy and azure sand, extols the virtues of logic and rationality, why is he doing this? For what reason does he want the Solarians as a people to continue? What good is finding the secrets of the universe? What does Yi actually care about? Nine Souls wants to say that Yi doesn't know the answers himself, that instead of doing something which matters to him, he is swept up by the next task assigned by his mentor, or crisis that demands his attention, too busy to ever find an answer. Yi sees the world as bifurcated between science and stupidity, but fails to recognize that the two do not oppose one another. Recall that the reason Lear became a Taoist is not because he saw science as some false evil, but because in his aim to illuminate reality, he felt the pursuit was not worth the cost. He did not like what he had become, and that a society which has lost its sense of spirituality will lose itself soon after. When Yi asks him if he is doing the right thing by bringing the souls to justice, Lear tells him, "Fret not, the answer is already in your heart." This response echoes Chiyu's sentiment. The correct answer is for Yi to live according to himself. And it's not until he sees the infected Fusang at the end of the game that Lear's insight finally makes sense to him. The Eternal Cauldron project isn't worth the cost. Finding the sun that can illuminate the entire universe is not worth destroying an entire race of people and their home planet. That is not the kind of people the Solarians should endeavor to be. That is not the kind of people who deserve to continue existing. A culture which only cares about achieving its own immortality above all other moral considerations has run its course, and Agong's rejection of mortality is the culmination of the Solarians' moral decay. So for the first time, Yi makes a decision, and brings the sunlight back to the ape-man's world, not for logic or science's sake, but because it is something he actually believes in doing. Something he can wholeheartedly endorse, an action so earnest he knows it to be right without a second thought. Fittingly, this ending can only be seen should Yi interact deeply with Shannon and Xuanxuan in the pavilion, the two ape-men who helped lead him to this decision. No one is to blame, Nine Souls finally concludes. In the end, what does it matter who caused the destruction of the Solarians? A silly fallacy reminds us of the truth. Yi may have helped enslave the ape men, but if not for his actions, the ape men would also not be given a second chance at life on the pale blue planet. Right and wrong do not seem to matter under the Great Tao, because there will always be another opportunity to live truly to oneself. Why proselytize Nine Souls' story so much? Easy. It's a tour de force, a benchmark game creators and storytellers alike should be studying and taking notes from. Nine Souls feels like a full, mature story. If you've been on this channel for a while, you'll know I tend to focus almost as much on the structural aspects of a story as I do its content. This is no accident. There's a common sentiment that mature stories become so by attaching themselves to specific topics and themes and imagery. But I would have to disagree, or at the very least want to heavily shift that sentiment's emphasis. A story's maturity is by and large content independent. That is, maturity is formed in the organization of the story. Stories derive their meaning through the application of storytelling techniques in conjunction with the specific content of its narrative. So if you want to say a story is mature, the mere fact that it discusses topics like war and death, or the presence of graphic content is not enough. You also have to speak about the techniques it's using as well. It is, as everyone has always said, about the execution of an idea. Any subject matter can be made into a mature story if you approach it in the way Nine Souls does. The subplot between Yi and Heng is exactly what I'm talking about. Here's a game that, at what feels like random intervals, will stop dead in its tracks to show you a flashback with seemingly little relevance to what's going on in the main plot. Of course, these scenes are essential. They strike right at the center of Yi's internal conflict, about what he values and especially what he doesn't. Even though scenes like the one where they discuss the purpose of the rhizomatic towers don't explicitly bring up Taoism and Lear, as I've hopefully shown, the relationship between Yi and spirituality is absolutely what it's getting at. But Nine Souls isn't going to tell you that. It's not going to tell you why we must periodically stop to watch Yi reminisce about his sister, or how the two's arguments reveal the folly in Egong's everlasting vision. Nine Souls simply tells you that it does matter, and the why and how it works in tandem with the current narrative is up to you to figure out. It's a fairly sophisticated storytelling technique, all things considered, one which invites the player to take an engaged perspective on the material while playing. It hardly stops there. The dialogue in Nine Souls is disgustingly good. The urge to just quote entire conversations between the characters verbatim in this video was strong, because I only wish I could write as well as Nine Souls does on the regular. The way the characters talk about their musings and feelings is downright beautiful. The way they connect their ideas through stories and metaphor is clarifying to their perspectives. The way they treat mundane happenings as microcosms for their larger worldviews is insightful. The way they manage to loop ideas within the course of several conversations back on themselves is satisfying. Even down to the word choice, the dialogue just sounds good to read. Hearing Ji describe the appeal of the parting missive, or how Chiyu learned to gain sentience, is mesmerizing. And the best part is that what's being discussed never becomes inaccessible or vague. The writers and the English translators deserve nothing short of a standing ovation for what's been accomplished here. The cinematography too, for lack of a better word, is excellent. I loved the match cut from Yi's mystic nymph terminal to Yi himself bleeding out on a giant circular torture wheel. It's a clever transition that implies the effects his experimental projects are having on his soul. Science is his prison, after all. Red Candle Games uses their horror background to make the tone swapping gripping. The game is starkly unafraid to show what it thinks it needs to show to get the point across. Yanlo spends most of the time we spend inside the warehouse staring at us through monitors, his eyes twitching with frustration. As the chase looks more and more dire for him, the perspective shifts. Instead of seeing Yanlo through the screens, Yi begins to overtake his place, culminating in a boss where we watch ourselves fight a laser arm on one of Yanlo's giant monitors, defeating one of the great souls without even placing a finger on him. Elsewhere, the residential Empyrean district is covered in strange mutated goo, blood, and littered with shattered glass. Harsh gurgling passes through the walls while taking the elevator up several buildings. After each stop, the room adjacent lights up, revealing either an abandoned apartment or monstrous mutation, impervious to Yi's attacks. Yet what's most admirable about Nine Souls is that I wouldn't call it a depressing, grimdark game by any stretch. Nine Souls is able to switch modalities in a way that hardly ever feels jarring or inappropriate. There's plenty of humorous scenes in the game, and characters with fairly jovial personalities that add a texture to the overall tone. In fact, the characters without jovial personalities reflect this as well. Yi is not some one-note, edgy loner seeking revenge. He's just a regular guy who's kind of inconsiderate to the people he thinks are wasting his time. He's willing to sit down and tell stories to Xuan, advise him not to spend more than 30 minutes on the VR headset, and talk about the things he used to do with his friends. I called Yi's perspective rich earlier, but the character is rich as well. He feels like an actual person, not just a receptacle for a philosophy the story wants to dismantle. Yi, and those around him, are more than their thematic purpose. But mostly, Nine Souls feels mature because it's legitimately interested in itself. Characters and scenes are deliberate, each adding on to the central topics of the game. The game utilizes them to test out different ideas, and see how those differing viewpoints will respond to one another. Nine Souls slowly unravels the mechanics of its setting in ways that are both comprehensible yet require the audience to be fully engaged. Here is a story that doesn't feel like it's force-feeding you its themes, while also substantially discussing said themes in an interesting and novel way. When you add it all together, there's really only one logical conclusion. Nine Souls lives for itself.